on DAB digital radio, digital TV, downloads and online.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
With Stephen Nolan.
Right, we'll have a look through all of tomorrow morning's papers, Sunday's papers, in just a second or two. Before we do so, more now on the news that the Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, has said the housing market has deep problems and is the biggest risk to Britain's economic recovery. Mr. Carney's comments have made many of today's front pages. Here to tell us more, the property expert Kate Faulkner from propertychecklist.co.uk. Hello to you, Kate.
Hi there.
Good morning. And Jonathan Davis is with us, an investment advisor, former spokesman for propertycrash.co.uk. Hello, Jonathan.
Hello, Stephen.
Good morning. Kate, what do you think? Because these are pretty much outspoken comments from Carney, aren't they?
I think I'd say less outspoken, and I'd just say they're honest, to be honest, because he's right. At the end of the day, he's in a situation whereby in the past we've been able to manage the housing market through interest rates, but now we're in a delicate situation whereby it's a pretty blunt measure which could affect if he uses it, could affect the recovery, whereas now versus 14 years ago, the substantial amount of people own their own homes outright, and in a few years' time, probably more people will own their homes outright than with a mortgage. So even if he uses interest rates, it's not necessarily going to stop house prices going up.
Jonathan, you no doubt think he's right too.
When he says that it's the biggest risk to the economy, that part of what he said, yes, I'd agree that he's perfectly right.
Why do we think that, Jonathan, that there should be so much doom and gloom at a time when property prices are increasing?
I don't know where you're getting doom and gloom from.
You're predicting a crash.
Beg your pardon?
You're predicting a crash, aren't you?
In due course, we had the first phase in 2008. They then slashed interest rates and bailed out the banks, so they kicked the can down the line. The main course, as far as I'm concerned, is still to come.
Do you agree, Kate?
No, I don't really, because there is this kind of flaw which we've been seeing certainly over the last 5 or 6 years on how far house prices will fall. And again, that's because we're moving into an ageing population, and because of that ageing population, on average, people are now staying in a home for 25 years. And whatever happens to interest rates, there's an awful lot of people that will not be affected at all, and also refuse to move if they don't get what they want for their property. So I'm not with Jonathan that there is, and this has been going on for a long time, sort of 14 years since we're saying there's going to be an ultimate crash and another correction, etc. Where I think Mark Carney is absolutely right is that the only way for our economy to grow healthily ongoing is to build more homes to match the demand and the population increase. And that's really what Mark's saying, and he's absolutely right.
And that's for government to legislate so that more homes will be built, I presume.
Well, to some extent, but I think where the government...
Relax the planning laws, for example.
Not necessarily just the planning laws, because actually there have been changing to those, and there's kind of differing views on how it is. But there is a bigger problem, and that is that we have a private sector, there is a small affordable sector, and there are supposed to be social homes built to help people that are vulnerable and certainly couldn't afford to live in the affordable or the private rental sector or the private sector. And the issue that we have now is there's a big concentration on the private sector. Affordable funds for the affordable sector have been slashed, and nobody seems to be taking any responsibility for housing people on their council waiting lists. And I think there has to be acceptance amongst politicians that there are three markets and that they need to look after all three of them.
Go on, Jonathan.
Absolute rubbish. Free markets. There hasn't been a free market in real estate for decades, if ever. I might mention to you the current policy, which is entirely anti-free market. It's called Help to Buy. In 2010, 11 and 12, house prices were practically flat. and the housing market was in a state of collapse. Going into 2013, some of us were saying that prices were about to fall over a cliff. And then the government, eyeing the Euro elections this year, next week in fact, and the general election next year, thought we've got to do something about this, so they brought in Help to Buy. That is just one of a series of interventions by governments over decades. Free markets, I'm laughing out loud.
Well, I'm not surprised, because I actually didn't say free, I said 3, Jonathan. So I said there are 3 housing markets, and that's very different.
Okay, fine.
And the reality is, with Help to Buy, we've sold 27,000 of those on that scheme out of 800,000 homes that we would normally sell. It turned sentiment, but it hasn't done anything to cause the damage you're suggesting.
That's the point. That's the point, Kate. It turned sentiment. The market was prices were about to fall over a cliff. But as I say, that was just one of many interventions over years and decades.
So,
and the thing you're not saying, Kate...
But hold on, Jonathan. If they're about to fall
I
over
need to make a point.
But if they're about to fall over a cliff, why were they pretty much in most markets at 0 level, bar a few around the country, and then in London they were already growing? This is news to me that they're about to fall off a cliff, because certainly from all the analysis I've done, that's actually just not true.
Yeah, well, no, I disagree entirely. You're asking me a question. The answer is because the banks were not lending to folk to buy property because the banks knew what was going to happen to property prices. So that's why the government had to step in with this Help to Buy nonsense to basically guarantee, in effect, the mortgages, because otherwise the banks weren't going to lend. And the reason, Stephen, why house prices have risen for the last 30 or 40 years at the rate they have is not because of the number of properties built or immigration. It's because of the level of lending. It's always been the case that any asset, any market, whether it's houses or gold or shares, if you can get lending into the market, then the price will rise. And that's where the problem was. The lending had collapsed. And I need to make one final point. I said to you that at some point this market is going to absolutely and utterly collapse. And I'll tell you why I say that. Exactly. You know what, Stephen? We have a base rate which is the same for the last 5 years, 0.5%.
I know, I'm on it. Base plus 0.5%. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Long may it continue.
And it's meant more people will own their homes outright in the future, Jonathan.
I'm paying 1%. I'm paying 1% of my mortgage. It's like all my Christmases have come at once.
Exactly. But how do you equate that, Jonathan, with the fact that more people will own a home outright than with a mortgage? In the future.
Just let me make my point, please. Absolutely. The slashing in the base rate in 2009, it bailed out all the borrowers, including Stephen Nolan. Okay, the thing is, the base rate is 0.5%. It's 0.25% in the US. It's 0.5% in the EU. My point being, it's practically rock bottom. And this is the thing that no one's talking about. The next time we have a global economic shock like 2008, and remember, we're 6 years beyond there, so it must be relatively soon. They will not be able to slash interest rates because they're already practically rock bottom. Now, you think about that in a recessionary environment. Businesses going bust left, right and centre, people losing their jobs. It will not make the blindest bit of difference to borrowers if their mortgage goes down from 3% to 2%, because if they haven't got an income, they will not service the debt. That is why the next crash will be the big one. 2008 was inevitable. It was absolutely inevitable. What they should have done was let capitalism take its course. Prices would have collapsed, and we could have really got the market going forever. Instead, they bailed out the borrowers.
Collapse at the rate that you've been predicting
Can I
for
finish
14 years
finish
now.
my point?
Well, you're doing quite well at finishing.
But you have made that point, and you've been saying this now for 14 years. And the
No,
one
I
year
haven't.
where I remember it
How
wasn't
dare you?
said
How dare you
was
say something which isn't the
2007.
truth? Don't accuse me of something which isn't the truth. I have not been saying that. That's absolute rubbish. How dare you?
How long have you been set up for? Calm down. It's midnight. Calm down. How long have you been set up for?
I will calm when someone doesn't make either she doesn't know what she's talking about or she's making a blatant lie. I have been particularly bearish. I was particularly bearish about the housing market in 2005, 6 and 7. Then we saw what happened in 2008. Then, do you know what? I turned mildly bullish, and I turned particularly bullish in 2013. But I'll tell you what, at some point, this thing's going to crash for exactly the reason I just explained.
Well, hold on a minute. 2005 to 2013 is 8 years. What did she say, 10? Which wasn't that far away.
My understanding was that the first programmes that came out, and Jonathan, if I am wrong on my date, I genuinely, humbly apologise. My understanding was the first time I saw you on telly was 2003 doing the programmes. If that was 2005, then I genuinely apologise. I would never smear somebody unfairly.
You should apologise because I didn't appear on television until 2006, to my recollection.
Oh, okay. Stay there, you two, because we can bring Ruth Porter in to this, who's reviewing our papers tonight from the Policy Exchange, an influential think tank in the right of British politics. No doubt, Ruth, you've got a lot to say about this. It's also front page of the Sunday Times, Carney sounds housing alarm, and the broadcaster Andy Walton. Hello, Andy.
Hey, good morning.
So let's get into this. What do you think, Ruth? Stay there, Jonathan and Kate. Go ahead, Ruth.
Well, I think it's interesting that we're talking about this in a sense as news again. The fact that Mark Carney's saying this, I think for a long time.
Of course, it's news.
Well, I think it's actually it's been said so many times now, and I think actually if you consider what one area do people across the political spectrum, politicians of all stripes, people in all kinds of different sectors, the one thing that people seem to be able to agree on at the moment is that we've got a huge issue in the UK with housing affordability, and that the root cause of that is a lack of housing supply. And that really is the issue. We've done work at Policy Exchange. We think that actually by 2020, we need substantially more houses to be built. And what we've argued is that at the moment, the current system, although the government's talked about liberalising planning, the current system simply doesn't make it easy enough for people to come in and to build new houses. There's not enough of an incentive for local communities to want development, and it's still far too difficult for developers. And the reality is that until we move forward with that and until we have proper supply in this country, we're going to continue to have these issues around housing affordability.
That's not true, Stephen. It's not true. Ruth, you are a highly experienced economist and researcher, and I find it remarkable that your body and the Institute of Economic Affairs come up with the same analysis, and yet look at, for example, Ireland, look at Spain, look at China, who have put 15% of their GDP into building real estate, and the house prices continued to soar. So there is no way that the lack of building is the reason why we've got a bubble. It's the reason why we've got this great problem in housing. It's because of the lending. If you took away the easy lending or the guarantees from government, you know what would happen? House prices would fall and the supply of property would go through the stratosphere.
Go on, Andy.
Yeah, I think this is news, and I think the reason why is because the governor of the central bank is effectively criticising a central plank of the Chancellor's economic strategy. And that plank was to reinflate the housing bubble, as we've heard, and I don't agree with everything Jonathan said, but actually George Osborne's strategy here was based towards this European election and towards the next general election, and it is not a long-term sustainable strategy. And the strategy is to pin pretty much all his hopes on rising house prices in London and other areas of the southeast. House prices have gone up year on year, about 18% in London. That is completely unsustainable. And the reason this is news is that Mark Carney, I think, is right. We do need more houses to be built, and we need to let local councils do that. I'm not sure we need to let private developers be the only ones to profit from this. We need to let normal people actually get on the housing ladder if that's what they so desire. But the reason it's news is because this is a massive slapdown for George Osborne from the Governor of the Bank of England.
I mean, if you look at the scale of new homes that we're needing, it's somewhere around 1.5 million new homes in the next 6 years or so.
I actually think that's quite simply a low figure. Well, because if you think about it, we've already been short about 750,000 just over the last 5 or 6 years.
Well,
what I would say is, though, that we do talk about London as if it's the rest of the country, and it isn't. London is an international city and needs to be treated as such and have a very separate policy. I'm in Nottingham, for example. We have properties here that haven't gone up in price for 10 years. We have properties where actually, Jonathan is quite right. A bubble was caused, and we have properties in the centre of Nottingham that are selling out for half the price still from 7 years ago. One of the reasons why prices are reasonable in Nottingham and remain so and will continue to be so is because actually we have quite a good supply versus demand. And that proves that if you get supply and demand right, and we have that right, in other areas like the northeast, for example, where you haven't got population growth, there is nowhere near the pressure on prices.
Okay.
And what you have in London at the moment is panic buying causing price rises.
Ruth, you want to finish your point? Go ahead.
Well, I'll just pick up actually on that point, which is I think that is an important element of this, that we need to remember that the issues are different in different regions, and London and the South East is in a different position to some of the rest of the country. But I think taken as a whole, we need to look at actually thinking about this in a more innovative way and looking at it's not just a case of tweaking here and there and building a few more houses, but it's actually looking at how we can have even whole new settlements, so garden cities, if you like, places where you have whole new swathes of housing built. And because it's not just about housing. I think if you hear the concerns of local communities, often one of the things they're concerned about is whether there's going to be enough infrastructure to support new developments. So are there going to be enough primary school places? How's that going to affect things like roads and congestion and demand on the hospitals and the GP surgeries? And I think if we look at this idea of actually having garden cities, finding ways of building entire new developments, that will go a long way towards providing the supply that we need.
Right, we will leave it there. We will say thank you to Jonathan and to Kate. Thank you very much. We will say a proper good morning to Ruth and Andy. Morning to you both.
Good morning. Hey, it's feisty this morning, isn't it?
Yes, it is.